Hello guys, my name is Stan. Welcome to another video. Do not forget to like video and subscribe his channel.
The test strip doesn't lie. Sofia Vega had been putting off the checkup for 3 weeks. Between the humidity of July pressing through her studio apartment windows, 3 deadline-heavy client projects, and a streak of dizzy spells she had been blaming on bad coffee, she had kept postponing the trip to Dr. Carmenobi's clinic on the corner of 5th and Meridian. It was Lena who finally drove her there, one hand on the wheel and the other offering a granola bar. Sofia refused. "You're just anemic," Lena said confidently. "Eat red meat. Done. We can go to brunch after." Sofia had smiled and agreed because agreeing was easier than worrying. The clinic smelled like lavender and antiseptic in a combination that always made Sofia feel 12 years old. Dr. Small, efficient, with reading glasses she only ever wore pushed to the top of her head, took her blood pressure, reviewed her labs from the previous week, and then sat down across from her in a way that told Sofia the news was not going to be anemia. "Sofia," Dr. folded her hands. "You're pregnant. Approximately 8 weeks." The fluorescent light above the examination table buzzed. Sofia became aware of the paper sheet beneath her crinkling every time she breathed. "I'm sorry," she said. "Can you say that again?" It was not a question. Dr. said it again anyway, gently, with all the patience she had clearly built over 20 years of delivering life-altering news to stunned women in paper gowns. Sofia sat very still and let the number, 8 weeks, travel backward through her memory like a thread being pulled from a spool. 8 weeks ago was May. May was the rooftop charity dinner that Lena had dragged her to because one of the sponsors had been looking for a freelance illustrator to design event materials, and Lena, relentlessly, believed in Sofia's work even when Sofia did not. May was the man she had spent 4 hours talking to on a terrace lit by string lights, the man who had asked her genuinely thoughtful questions about color theory and had laughed at her jokes in a way that felt earned rather than polite. The man with calm dark eyes and an unbuttoned collar, and the name she had repeated to herself on the car ride home, not because she intended to do anything about it, but because it had felt worth remembering. Dominic Castillo. Sofia's breath left her body in one quiet, catastrophic exhale. Outside the exam room, Lena was still presumably planning their brunch order. Sofia sat alone with the paper sheet crinkling beneath her and the weight of 8 weeks gathering in the air like weather. She was going to need something stronger than a granola bar. The man with the penthouse view. It took Sofia 4 days to find the courage, and Lena's very aggressive research skills, to locate Dominic Castillo's office. She had spent those 4 days cycling through the full spectrum of human emotion. Denial, followed by something that felt like grief, followed by a very practical spreadsheet of options that she made at 2 in the morning and immediately closed without saving. What remained, once the cycling stopped, was a quiet and stubborn certainty that the man deserved to know. The Castillo Development Group occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower downtown that looked like it had been designed by someone who believed sunlight was a form of power. Marcus Webb, Dominic's assistant, trim, unreadable, wearing a watch that probably cost more than Sofia's rent, met her at reception and walked her to a waiting area with a view of the entire city laid out below like an illustration she might have been commissioned to draw. She had prepared a speech. She reviewed it mentally while staring at the skyline. Dominic appeared in the doorway, and the speech evaporated. He was exactly as she remembered, perhaps slightly more formal in a charcoal jacket, but the eyes were the same, and the stillness was the same, that particular quality he had of seeming genuinely unhurried in a way that made the rest of the world feel like it was spinning unnecessarily fast. "Sofia Vega," he said. Not a question. He remembered her name. She stood up. "I need to tell you something." "You do," he agreed, as if this were a continuation of a conversation rather than the beginning of a difficult one. "But first, have you eaten? Marcus, can we get lunch sent up?" Sofia stared at him. "Did you? I haven't even told you what this is about." "No," he said. "But you look like someone who has been not sleeping and not eating for several days, and whatever you need to tell me will be easier to hear and easier to say if neither of us is hungry." He gestured toward the conference room. "I promise I won't run." She laughed, a short, involuntary sound that surprised her, and then pressed her hand over her mouth. He smiled then, just slightly, the corner of his mouth lifting. "There she is," he said quietly, almost to himself. She told him over delivery from a Thai restaurant 2 blocks away. She was direct, factual, braced for the 17 different versions of badly that she had imagined this going. He listened the entire way through without interrupting, his food untouched, his eyes on her face, not with panic, but with the focused, careful attention of someone who understood that what was happening mattered. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "All right," Dominic said. "All right," she repeated. "I'm not going anywhere, Sophia. I want to be clear about that from the beginning." He picked up his fork. "Now eat something. You're making me nervous." She ate something. And somewhere in the strangeness of that afternoon, with the city glittering 40 floors below them, the terror began, very slightly, very carefully, to loosen its grip. Building something neither planned. The renovation of Sophia's apartment was supposed to take 3 weeks. It took 6, because the contractor discovered water damage behind the bathroom wall that had apparently been there since approximately the Second World War, and because the universe, Sophia had begun to feel, had a very specific sense of humor about her life. Dominic's estate sat 40 minutes outside the city, a house that was technically modern but felt somehow warm, all clean stone and large windows, and a kitchen that had clearly been designed by someone who actually cooked. His older sister Renata Castillo had shown up on Sophia's 3rd day there with a casserole dish and a frankly alarming amount of opinions about prenatal nutrition, and had immediately begun treating Sophia like a beloved younger sister she had simply been waiting to collect. Sophia had not expected to like Renata this much. She had not expected to like any of this as much as she did. She and Dominic fell into a rhythm that felt accidental and inevitable at the same time. He worked early mornings in his home office and she worked at the long kitchen table, her drawing tablet and scattered reference images spreading slowly across the surface like a benevolent takeover. They had discovered within the first week that they were both useless cooks despite their ambitions, and so dinner became a collaborative disaster that usually ended in takeout and the kind of laughter that comes from failing at something together. "You said medium heat," Sophia said one evening, gesturing at the distinctly blackened edge of what had been intended as a frittata. "I said medium heat for the pan," Dominic replied with great dignity, "not the entire situation." "That's the same thing." "It categorically is not." She threw a dish towel at him. He caught it without looking up. They ordered dumplings and ate them on the back porch in the late evening light, Sophia's feet tucked beneath her on the outdoor sofa, Dominic beside her with his sleeves rolled up, the architecture drawings he'd been reviewing set aside. The garden smelled like jasmine. The baby turned, a small, strange flutter that Sophia had only recently begun to recognize, and without thinking, she pressed her hand to her side. Dominic noticed. He always noticed things. "Does it hurt?" he asked. "No," she said. "It's, actually, here." She took his hand and placed it over the spot, matter-of-fact, without ceremony. The flutter happened again. Dominic went very still. His expression did something she hadn't seen it do before, something open and unguarded and quietly undone. "That's him," Sophia said softly. "That's him," Dominic repeated. They didn't move for a long moment. The jasmine drifted. The evening held them there, in that particular kind of silence that isn't empty but full of something neither of them had a name for yet, but both of them, tentatively, had begun to want. Later that night, when the house was quiet and the hall light was dim, Dominic paused outside her bedroom door. Not to enter, just to pause. She heard it from the other side, heard him stop, heard the long exhale of a man actively choosing patience over instinct. She pressed her palm flat against the door. After a moment, he walked on. Both of them lay awake for a long time after that, in separate rooms, thinking about the same things. The night the walls came down. The annual Meridian Foundation Gala was held on a Friday in late October, at a rooftop venue with a view of the harbour. Sophia went because Renata had bought her a dress, deep burgundy, soft silk that gathered gently at the waist in a way that was both elegant and forgiving of the small, undeniable curve that her body had been quietly building for months. She went because Dominic had asked, not with pressure but with a kind of quiet hopefulness that she found, increasingly, very difficult to say no to. She had known, walking in, that it would stir something. It was the same type of event. String lights. Charity programs. The low hum of wealth making conversation with good causes. The smell of flowers on the tables and the city spread below like a map of all the possibilities she had once been afraid to reach for. Dominic stayed close. Not possessively, just present. They moved through the event together, speaking with the people he knew, and she noticed how different it felt from that first evening, how she was no longer watching him from across a rooftop but standing beside him, her hand occasionally finding his arm, his hand occasionally finding the small of her back with a touch so light it was almost a question. It was Marcus who inadvertently separated them near the bar. Sophia drifted toward the garden terrace. She stood at the edge, looking out at the harbor lights, and heard him behind her a moment later, the specific rhythm of his footsteps that she had somehow, without meaning to, memorized. "You looked like you needed air," Dominic said. "I always need air at these things," she looked at him. "You were different that first night. You know that? You seemed untouchable," he offered. His voice was quiet. There was something different in it. "I was going to say lonely," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Around them the night held still, as nights sometimes do when they understand that something important is happening within them. "My last relationship ended badly," he said. "Not as an excuse, as a door finally opened. She left because I work too much, care too much about control, keep too much inside. She was right about all of it. I've been trying to figure out what version of myself doesn't do those things." He paused. "And then you showed up at my office with Thai food and the complete inability to hide what you're feeling at any given moment. And he stopped. "And you what?" Sophia said softly. He stepped closer. His hand rose slowly and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear with a tenderness that was almost unbearable in its gentleness. "I think I started looking forward to the mornings," he said. "And then the evenings. And then the in-between parts." Sophia's heart was doing something very loud. "Dominic," she whispered. "I know," he said. "I know the timing is complicated. I know there's 1,000 reasons to be careful. I needed you to know that what I feel is not about obligation." His thumb brushed lightly along her cheekbone. "It has nothing to do with obligation." She closed the last inch of distance between them. The kiss was slow and certain, the kind that doesn't ask permission because both people have already said yes in every small way for weeks. In dish towels thrown across kitchens, in hands held over heartbeats, in doors paused beside in the dark. It tasted like coming home to a place you'd never been but had somehow always missed. When they finally broke apart, the harbor lights were still there, indifferent and glittering, and Sophia was laughing quietly against his jaw, and Dominic's forehead was resting against hers, and both of them were breathing like they'd been underwater for a very long time and had only just surfaced. Renata, who had been watching from the terrace door for at least 45 seconds, very quietly went back inside to tell Marcus that she had been right, that she was always right, and that someone owed her a very expensive glass of champagne. Everything she never knew she needed. Mateo Castillo arrived on a Tuesday morning in December, in a blur of hospital lights and Lena's hand-squeezing and Dominic pacing in the hallway until a nurse, with great firmness, made him sit down. Sophia would later tell people that it was the hardest and most extraordinary thing she had ever done, which was accurate and also somehow insufficient as a description. There were no words, she found, for the specific quality of that moment when Mateo was placed on her chest, small and red-faced and furiously alive, his whole body radiating indignation at having been evicted from somewhere warm. She looked up and found Dominic. He was standing at the edge of the room, and he had clearly been trying very hard to maintain the composure that was, in ordinary life, so deeply habitual to him. He was failing. His jaw was set and his eyes were bright and his hands, those steady, precise hands she had watched review architectural plans and gently press over her ribs to feel a flutter, were shaking slightly at his sides. "Come here," she said. He crossed the room in 3 steps. The nurse placed Mateo into his arms with careful instruction, and Dominic held his son with the concentrated terror of someone who had never in his life wanted so badly not to make a mistake, and then he laughed. It was quiet and broken and completely undone, and it was the most beautiful thing Sophia had ever heard from him. She reached up and took his hand where it curved around the baby's back, and Dominic looked from Mateo to her with an expression that had no armor in it at all. No distance, no walls, just the full, undisguised face of a man who understood precisely how much he had to lose and had decided, completely, to feel it anyway. "Hello, Mateo," Dominic murmured. The baby blinked with the vague authority of someone who found all of this perfectly adequate. Lena, in the corner, was crying into a coffee cup. Renata arrived 40 minutes later with 2 shopping bags of things no one had asked for and declared the baby perfect and also extremely handsome like his aunt. In the months that followed, Sophia's life became something she could not have illustrated even at her best. Not because it was enormous or glamorous, though sometimes it was, but because it was layered. There were mornings where Matteo screamed at 3 a.m. and they stood side by side in the nursery, swaying and bleary, finding each other's eyes over the top of a wailing infant and laughing in that helpless, exhausted way that becomes, over time, one of the languages of love. There were evenings on the back porch with Jasmine still drifting, Dominic's arm around her shoulders and Matteo asleep between them in a soft chair, the garden holding them in its quiet the way it had that first night with the flutter and the unspoken everything. He proposed on a Thursday, which was not a special day, which was, Sophia thought, exactly the point. He did it in the kitchen, over coffee gone cold and the wreckage of a breakfast attempt they'd already abandoned, going down on one knee on the tile floor with a ring he had apparently been carrying in his jacket pocket for 3 weeks waiting for the right moment before deciding that the right moment was simply any moment she was in. "I love you," he said. "Not because of Matteo. Not because of that night in May. Because of every ordinary day since. Because you throw dish towels and you feel everything out loud and you make me want to stop being careful with myself." Sophia looked at him for a long moment, this man who had walked into her life through the most improbable door, this man whose steadiness had quietly, entirely rebuilt her sense of what was possible. "Yes," she said. "Obviously yes. Get up off that tile, it's cold." He stood up, and she kissed him before he could say anything else, and the coffee went cold on the counter, and outside the December garden was grey and frost-tipped and impossibly beautiful.